Welcome. I think I see a lot of familiar faces on here tonight, but I want to go ahead and introduce myself for people who watch the video later. My name is Kim Temple, and I own Runaway Realty in Puerto Morelos, along with my husband, Gabriel Ortega, who is from Mexico, so he's not really that interested in moving to Mexico Mondays. I've been in Mexico for almost 10 years. January will be my 10-year Mexiversary, so that's exciting. And have been in real estate and that entire time. So we are happy to have this program that we want to just provide education in a non-threatening, non-salesy way to help people with their questions about moving to Mexico, buying in Mexico. We know that there's a ton of information out there that's contradictory and oftentimes really outdated and not correct. So we find that this is a really great way to share valuable information in a non-threatening environment and to get your questions answered. So if you really want to make this happen, we're going to give you some tools to go ahead and do that. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Just a couple of housekeeping things. One is that we're recording this meeting. And so if you don't want to appear on camera, you can turn your camera off at any time. But we're going to record it and then post it on our YouTube page later. The other thing is that most of you joined the meeting, well, all of you joined with your microphone muted. Once we get started, please keep it muted unless you have a question, because the way the video works is whenever there's noise, the camera cuts to wherever the noise is coming from. So if we have background noise, dogs barking and stuff, it can get really confusing on the video replay. So I appreciate it if you would mute the microphone. Tonight we are kind of going back to basics with our back to school, basically the basics of buying and moving to Puerto Morelos. So I do have a little spiel that I'm going to go to, and then I'm going to stop every few minutes to take your questions, because I know there will be some. And as always, please remember to use the chat box. Let me just... if you go down to your bottom of your screen, you'll see it. And I've already popped the link to our Puerto Morelos buyers brainstorming guide in there, which has a lot of the information we're going to talk about tonight. But it's also really something geared for people who are getting ready to start looking for property in Puerto Morelos. And it's kind of a neighborhood guide and things to think about before you start looking, and information on renting your property out and stuff like that. So it's kind of chock full of good information. It's a good place to start. The other good place to go for information besides these Moving to Mexico Monday videos is our frequently asked questions page. That will also walk you through kind of the buying process and things that if people have questions about. Okay. If for some reason we lose internet, I will try to pop back on and post a link on our Facebook page. So keep a watch on that. I think, one of the biggest questions, well, one of the most frequent questions that we get, and I see it almost every day, is can foreigners own property in Mexico? Can you own on the beach? Can you own property? Is it a lease? Is it safe? All of those questions are very valid. And I want to start with the first most basic one, which is yes, you can own property in Mexico as a non-Mexican. Mexico has a unique system in that in most of Mexico, you can own property directly, but they do have a restricted zone along Mexico's land and sea borders. It is 100 kilometers from a land border and 50 kilometers from a sea border. And within that restricted zone, they've limited foreign ownership of property. They did this for many reasons. Historically, Mexico was invaded a few times by Spain and the US. So they decided to protect their border from foreign ownership. This dates back to their constitution long ago. About 40 years ago, they decided, hey, we do want to encourage foreign investment in Mexico. So we are going to allow foreigners to own property. And the way that we're going to allow them to own property is in an asset trust called a fideicomiso. Fideicomiso is a weird word, and you've probably seen it if you've done any research. And the word actually just means trust, but there are very specific trusts that are allowed for foreigners to own property. So it's not something sneaky that you're getting around a rule. The government created this trust and said, hey, foreigners, come own property here, and this is how you can do it. So that part is not sketchy at all. It's just an asset trust like we have in the US and Canada. You place the property into the trust. In this case, the trustee or the administrator of the trust is going to be a Mexican bank with a specific designation that allows it to be a fideicomiso administrator. And you will be the primary beneficiary of the trust. Usually a couple buys property, and so you're dual primary beneficiaries, so that if one of the primary beneficiaries passes away, the property automatically goes to the other beneficiary. Within the trust, you can also name substitute beneficiaries. So if both primary beneficiaries pass away, the property goes just as a matter of the trust to the people you've designated as substitute beneficiaries. This is really handy because when you live and own property in Mexico, you either have, well, let me just back up. The trust defines the terms of ownership. Because the property is in a trust, the only way you can affect the property is with the trust. So if you have a will in the United States that leaves your property to someone else, it doesn't matter. They're not going to honor that will because in the trust, you told them who you want the property to go to. So the trust is awesome because it allows you to control what happens when you pass away. You're not at the whim of the Mexican probate court, which is notoriously slow and expensive. And so in that way, a trust is great. The other way it's great is that it's ownership. There's nothing that you can't do with a trust that you couldn't do if there wasn't a trust involved. The trustee bank has no rights to your property. They can't enter it. They can't loan against it. They can't borrow against it. It's not an asset of the bank. It's a legal fiction created to allow ownership in Mexico's restricted zones. So the only thing the trust does, or the bank does as your trust, the administrator of the trust, is send you a bill once a year. And sometimes they don't even do that. You have to know when your bill is due because they don't even really send you a bill on time. So they really have nothing to do with your property except that they're administering the trust. And if you ever want to make changes, if someone passes away and you need to recognize another beneficiary, or something happens and you want to change your beneficiaries, then the bank is involved and you tell them what you want to do. When you decide to sell your property, you're going to tell the bank, hey, trustee of the trust, we're selling to someone else. We want you to transfer the trust. Or if you sell to a Mexican person who doesn't need a trust, then you would extinguish the trust. So the bank is there in an administrative function only. This is in no way a lease, which is what I hear a lot of times. People are like, well, isn't it a lease? No. When you have a lease, someone else owns the property and they have the right to enter it, inspect it. They control what you can do on it. There are terms for them to remove you from a lease. This is completely different. The bank can't remove you from your property, ever. They don't control what you do on it, ever. You own the property. The trust itself is limited to 50 years only because when you have a legal trust, you have to have an end date. That's one of the things that allows it to be a legal trust. The reality is most people don't own property for 50 years. But if you do, if you're one of those people that does, at the end of your 50-year term, they're just going to automatically give you a new trust. There's no authority to deny you a trust and take your property. The only time the Mexican government can take your property, which is something that people have really, for some reason, well, I know why, but it happened a long time ago. Anyway, people have this vision that Mexico can just seize your property, but they cannot. They can declare eminent domain over property if they're going to put a highway through or the Mayan train. And if you're convicted of a federal crime involving the property, they can seize the property just like they can in the US. So I'm going to stop there and see if you guys have any questions about the fideicomiso trust and how that works. Anyone? Go ahead.
Kim, I've got a question.
Yeah.
The price to establish the fideicomiso, and then also, which I know, but I thought some other people might want to hear. And I do have a question. If you want to change the terms of the fideicomiso, do you know approximately what the expense involved with that is to make a change to it?
So the price to set up a new trust or transfer a trust, it's about the same. It's right around $2,000, either way you do it. And the ongoing annual fee for the trust is around $500. Within the terms of your trust, depending on who your trustee bank is, they're going to tell you how much it's going to cost to do all the different things. So if you recognize a substitute beneficiary, it's like $500. It's none of it is real expensive. None of it's as much as the original setting up the trust or the transfer of the trust. They're all around $400, $500, depending on what you want to do. But that will all be defined in your trust, and you're going to read through that at closing. But all the banks are right around that amount of money. Any other questions about the trust?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I do.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I was told that if the property value was under a certain amount, that there was only able to be like one primary beneficiary rather than like a husband and wife's name. Rather, it would be if it's less than maybe $200,000 or something, the second person would be like a beneficiary.
Nope.
Interesting.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. There can be two primary beneficiaries on any trust.
Okay.
And somebody had asked, I think I just saw in the chat, are some banks better than others? They're all pretty much the same. I mean, they don't offer any service, so there's not that much to compare. In fact, kind of the way we choose it is whoever's issuing their trusts faster when we're trying to close. And so sometimes one bank gets really overwhelmed and then you go to another bank. We tend to use Banco del Bajío because they tend to process them fast, and that's who the closing team that we work with uses. But there's other banks. There's Interacciones, and I feel like there's more banks. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with. Scotiabank's out of the trust business, so they used to be the big one. They used to hold a ton of fideicomiso trusts, and they don't do that anymore. Bancomer, I think, or Banamex, one of those big ones also does fideicomisos. Any other questions? Okay. So the trust lasts for 50 years. There's a cost to set it up and an annual fee. People often think that are like, we don't like the trust, so why can't we just open a corporation to own property, a Mexican corporation? And the answer to that is because the Mexican government has said very clearly, we've given you one way to own property and we want you to use that way. They don't want you opening a Mexican corporation solely for the purpose of owning residential property. And really, you don't want to do that. There was a kind of a trend towards doing that in the early 2000s, where lawyers convinced people that the trust was like this big scary thing and it was expensive and they shouldn't do it. Well, that's because the lawyers don't make money on setting up fideicomiso trusts. They do make money if you set up a corporation. So in fact, my house is in a corporation because someone convinced my mother of this. But it was never good advice. First of all, because the government has said don't do it. But secondly, because the minute you open a corporation here, you're opening yourself up to a bunch of requirements, including disclosures to the IRS in the United States. I'm not sure if it does it in Canada, but also you're required to pay taxes every month. You have to annual reporting that costs money. You have to hire an accountant for all of that. Just the trust is so much easier. The fideicomiso trust is so much easier. You pay an annual fee once every year. And it's way less hassle and less money than you're going to spend hiring lawyers and accountants to do taxes every year. there are certain limited circumstances when you might want to open a Mexican corporation. And when you're looking for property, it's important to talk to your agent about what you're going to do with that. And then we would sit down with an accountant and an attorney to see if really that's the best way for you to go. There's a lot of things to think about. And so opening a corporation is not as simple as people kind of think it will be. Sometimes if a group of people are going to buy a property together, maybe 2 or 3 couples or some other kind of group, it might be a good idea to open a corporation in the US or Canada and have that corporation be the beneficiary of the trust. That can be done. You still have to have the trust, you still have the annual trust fee, but the corporation is the beneficiary. And then when you have changes within the corporation, say one couple wants out, we had the situation last year, actually, 2 couples bought a property together. They didn't use an agent, so they weren't advised that they shouldn't have gotten on the trust together. And so when one couple decided they needed out and the other couple bought them out, that triggered a whole sale. So we had to pay all the closing costs again and all the purchase acquisition taxes. And all of that could have been avoided if they had set up a corporation in the US or they happened to be from the US. And then they could have just bought each other out in their shares there without triggering taxes here. So there's a lot of things to think about. So if you're going to have multiple people going in, I definitely think you should, talk to your tax people in the US. And then also we would talk to the lawyer here to see what the best way to do it is. But anytime you have a bunch of, several people involved, it's a little bit more tricky. It can all be done, but it's just finding out the best way to do it for you to protect your interest going forward and to minimize your costs going forward. Any questions about that? The corporation issue? You guys are good.
Kim, there's a question in the chat about the differing roles for notarios and attorneys in the process of establishing the fideicomiso.
Yes, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to the parties in a transaction. Let me just look at my notes really quick. Okay, yeah, so we'll get to the buying process. So the buying process in Mexico is not some super mysterious thing. It's going to be kind of familiar to people from the US and Canada, at least. It's a little bit similar. But I just want to preface this part of the discussion by saying that the most important thing I want to impart to you, if you don't hear anything else that I say tonight, is that when you are thinking of buying property here, you have to keep in mind, no matter how many properties you bought and sold in your life, this is another country with different laws, a different language, different cultural expectations. And so you need to really protect yourself and not assume that anything's going to work the way that you are used to it working. In the big picture, it does look a lot like what you've done before, but chances are where you're from, you have a lot more legal protection if something goes wrong than you do here. So I just want to really, remind you that going it alone and not surrounding yourself with professionals who are Mexican real estate attorneys, a good real estate agent, that's just a little bit crazy. You're buying a property in a foreign country where you don't have, as many rights as people from Mexico. So and your chances in a court of law here are not great. So you really need to upfront do all your due diligence and make sure that you're protected before you move into something. So I don't want to be scary because people do it all the time. I mean, thousands and thousands of people own property here. They never have a problem, but you can really screw yourself if you decide, just fall in love with something and make it happen at all costs without doing any due diligence, or, I don't want to pay an attorney. I don't want to pay the $500. It's not that much. I mean, I would consider whatever professionals you pay to help you is part of it's a title insurance. It's your insurance policy, and it's worth the cost. So that's my little downer vibe, I guess. in the buying process here, one thing to keep in mind is that there's no MLS, there's no multi-list system that's universally used here, and comparable sale information is not available. It's not publicly available. So we don't have the same information that you're used to having when you buy property in other areas. And that's part of why it's important to work with an established agent in an area, in a particular market, because, for example, we, you know, after almost 10 years of doing this, we have our own database now of what, you know, price per square foot, what things are going for in the different neighborhoods. Many times we bought and sold or been involved in sales of the same properties over and over. So, you know, we can tell you if something's a crazy price or there's a problem with a property. If you're just, you know, walking in on your own, you're not going to know any of that information. So it can be a little tricky. Finding a property can be a little more tricky than I think it is in other areas, because you have a lot more tools. You have the MLS, you have Zillow, and you know, all that stuff. And here we just don't have it. So when you're looking for property, let's, you know, be in touch ahead of time. Give yourself some time to check things out. Listing prices are not sale prices, so there's just a lot to consider there. Also, when you're looking for property, you may run into a site called Point Two Homes, which is a big listing site. Point Two Homes has become kind of a de facto MLS for us, but it has one very important difference that you have to remember, which is that they let anybody post properties. There's no one checking if they're real estate agents. There's no one checking if the property is legitimate. There's no one checking if the listing price is correct, if the address is, if the location is correct. So Point Two Homes is great as a tool, but it's not providing reliable information. So what we always say to our clients is, let's look at Point Two Homes, because we may find some properties there, but then we need to track them down and find out who the real owner is, who the real listing is. Does it exist? Is it really for sale? You know, does someone have authority to sell it? So Point Two Homes is helpful, but only to a certain point.
Kim?
So really,
Kim,
yes.
is there anyone that does title searches?
Yeah, well, so that's a good question. And so that's a good segue into who's involved in a transaction. When you buy property in Mexico, all property is transferred via a process overseen by a notario. A notario in Mexico is a lawyer who's gone on to get a special designation. He's almost like a semi-governmental official they're the only ones allowed to transfer real property. And part of their duties is the title search. They have a duty to the transaction, not necessarily to the parties in the transaction, but they are held liable if they do a title search and they don't uncover a problem. And there are other companies that offer title services, although I don't know if I'm not sure that they're doing that now, because I should back up. It's not really a thing that's important in Mexico, because the notario stands in the shoes of the title company. For a while, some US companies came in and started offering title insurance, and nobody bought it. So I don't think they're offering it anymore, because the notario is your title insurance. That being said, you know, in Puerto Morelos, our titles are very settled. We don't, especially in the Seaside Village and the Colonia and all those gated communities, it was never ejido land, which is tribal land. So there's not really title issues there. And we have a public registry, and of course they're going to search that and make sure there's no claims on property. Where you will run into trouble and want to be super careful and maybe pay for an extra title search is in areas like Tulum, where there was a bunch of ejido land, which is tribal land. Out in the Ruta de Cenotes of Puerto Morelos, there's ejido land. And that land can't be owned. It's owned by a tribe. I mean, it's called an ejido, not called a tribe, but there's a very complicated process that could result in title, but kind of, I mean, I've never heard anyone say, yes, a foreigner should try to get ejido land. It just seems to always end up in a disaster. So I would stay away from that. unless you are willing to dig in and, you know, spend a bunch of money to figure it out and have some time to wait for it to close. But in general, I would say avoid a ejido land at all costs. So in the transaction, you'll have the notario, and the notario doesn't represent anyone in the transaction. They don't owe you a duty of care. They don't owe you, I mean, they have their their procedures that they're required to follow, and they answer to the government, but it's not their job to tell you if your interests are protected. And that is why we always say to buyers, you need to have your own legal counsel. You need to have someone reviewing the paperwork with an eye to protecting your interests and to explain it to you. You know, there are real estate attorneys here who understand Mexican real estate law, who are bilingual, who can explain to you what you're signing. And all that is very important. So I would never tell you, even though I hear this all the time, oh, well, Joe at the bar told me that I can do it much cheaper. My closing costs will be much less if I just go directly to the notario. And that is true. You can do that. You can just do a transaction with a notario, but you know, you're not protected, and it doesn't cost much to give yourself the extra peace of mind and the extra insurance to make sure that your interests are protected. And also, sadly, just this year, we've had 2 transactions where the notarios completely screwed up the paperwork because there were no other eyes on it. There were 2 lots owned by the same people. They switched the legal description in the lots. And I mean, all of that costs money, and to sort that out is a huge mess. So it's good to have, notarios are great. This is their job, but it's good to have another set of eyes on it on your behalf to make sure you're double checking the notario's work, basically. Did that answer the question? I feel like I talked too long and now I don't remember what the question was. William, was that the answer? I mean, was that what you were asking? Okay.
That answered
Exactly right.
perfectly.
Okay. Or Dan, yeah. I wasn't sure who asked that. Okay, so you need to have your own attorney. Let's see. Okay, so when you find the property that you want, we're going to write up an offer, something you're similar with. If it's owned by a Mexican seller, we're going to write it up in English and Spanish. The seller will either accept a counter offer, we'll negotiate. Once we have an agreement on price and terms, we're going to circulate that for signatures, and then we turn it over to the closing attorney. We get a closing cost estimate. They prepare an escrow agreement. I just want to say one word about escrow accounts. It's just a trust account. I think in Canada it's called a trust account. In the US they call them escrow accounts. So an escrow account is not something that's even found in Mexico. They don't really have it. And really they don't need it for real estate transactions because there's typically no mortgage involved or anything. So when you are selling between 2 Mexican citizens, the sale can go very quickly. Make an agreement on Friday, you got a contract and you're moving, you're closing by Wednesday. So it moves very quickly. There's really no need to have a trust account because you're going to move along. When you are having a transaction that involves a foreigner here, we have to have the asset trust called the fideicomiso, and that can take some time. So instead of giving a seller $30,000 or whatever your earnest money deposit is going to be and waiting 60 to 90 to 120 days, which is how long it's taking right now to close, and hoping that they're going to be there and will not have sold it to someone else and they're going to finish the transaction, that's where an escrow account comes in really handy. You put the money in escrow, everyone knows it's safe, the seller knows you're serious because you put the money in, it's safe because they're not releasing it to the seller, and then we have the procedure go along, and then at closing the seller gets paid. So an escrow account is an expense that the buyer usually pays for, and it depends on the amount of your transaction. The cost of the escrow varies, but it's around $800, and it's, in my mind, money well spent to ensure to you that your money will be there when we get to closing. So I think everyone should use escrow if you can. There's some situations where you just can't use it. which are very particular, and we don't have to go into that right now, but in most cases, you can and should use escrow. Does anyone have any questions about that? Oh, there's a dog. Okay, so we made our offer, we made an agreement, you have your closing cost estimate, we set up and transferred your earnest money deposit into escrow. Then the closing attorney is gonna do the due diligence and make sure everything's okay, and then they're gonna prepare a contract. This contract is in English and Spanish, and it will have all the legalese. Our original offer is pretty bare bones. We're really just negotiating the price and the terms, like the earnest money deposit and when we want to close. But in the contract, everything's in there, including penalties for pulling out. So the contract is the legally enforceable document. And in Mexico, a contract is not enforceable unless you have an original signature. So we are typically having people FedEx this document around. So sometimes if we have a Canadian seller to a US buyer, you're just FedExing in Mexico and the US, and then someone sends it here. If the Mexican seller's here, you'll sign the contract wherever you are, and you'll send it here to be signed. So in most transactions, there's some sending of documents around. And that's because we need to have a contract with original signatures on file in case there's any dispute over the transaction. But you can do that from home. So everything can be done remotely except the closing. And a closing here, you either need to be at the closing table physically, appearing in front of the notario, or you need to have someone with your power of attorney here appearing at the closing. So if you think when we get started on the transaction, if it appears that you won't be able to be at closing, which by the way happened a lot in 2020 because we were in the middle of many transactions when everyone shut down, we need to get the ball rolling very quickly to get a power of attorney in place. It can be done. It's a little bit complicated, but nothing that can't happen. It does add a little bit to your costs to have a power of attorney prepared and finalized, and there's a process you have to go through in the US and Canada. And this year we had a guy in Scotland actually, and we went through the process there. So it's something that can be done. You just need to let us know as soon as possible, as soon as you believe that you might not be able to make it to a closing. The other thing I should tell you is that closing is not determined. We don't pick a date for closing in the beginning. Closing, we pick a date range. Like sometimes we have transactions, you enter into it in February, but you know that you aren't going to have your money together till June or longer. You can ask for a delayed closing. And so we kind of pick a date range, but it's not until things really get rolling that the attorneys can tell us, hey, we believe we're going to be ready to close the last week in July, pick a date. And no one's going to arbitrarily pick that date. You're going to talk about it with the seller, figure out when you can both be in Mexico and all that stuff. So you don't have to stress about that. It's not set arbitrarily. You have to tell us when you can be here. Yeah, so it's not something that you have to stress about, that someone's going to say, hey, we're closing on Friday and you have to be here. Okay, any questions about that? You guys are very quiet. I feel like maybe you should have more wine.
Kim, this is Dan.
Hi, Dan.
So Julie and I were just in Puerto during most of July, and we were looking at places, and we're coming back to live in November, and we're kind of on the fence of, are we going to buy or are we going to lease? And then a couple of the places that we looked at in Punta Vista and in Punta Arena, the owners were like, we ultimately want to sell, but we are willing to lease for 6 months with an option to switch it to a sale somewhere along the way. And I just want to get your thoughts on, what that lease contract should look like in order to make it flow into a smooth purchase if we decided that we were going to go to the purchase, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's not a question I can answer because I don't get buyers involved in that kind of a situation. I don't know that that's something that works. I don't know that it's binding. I don't know how you protect yourself. Rent to buy is not really something that they do very much here. So I'm not sure if you would, you know, I'm not sure how you do it. So I would have to put you in touch with an attorney. I don't know how you would do that.
Great.
Are you negotiating a sale price right now? Are you getting an offer, you know, an option to respond if they get an offer, and how are they going to prove to you that they have a legitimate offer? I mean, it raises all those issues, you know?
That's what I thought.
So it's just not something that we do much. And so I'm not the best person to ask about that, but I would, whoever, you know, I think you're working with Jess, I would make sure that you talk to an attorney before getting involved in that, just to make sure you're
Thanks. Yeah, the two of them are different too, the way that the owners positioned it. So they were different.
Oh, okay. And are they Mexican sellers?
One yes, one no.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I would talk to an attorney for sure. I can't really answer it. All right. Everything, I'm just looking at my notes. So everything can be done remotely except closing. And the other thing is that when people often ask if they need to have some kind of visa in Mexico to buy property, and the answer is no. You can buy property on a tourist visa. You just have to be in the country legally. You have to be able to prove that you're here legally. You have that little half sheet of paper that they gave you at the airport to show that you're here legally. So you don't need to do anything up front. You don't need to even have a bank account here. You can do everything, transfer the money remotely, or, you know, if we're using escrow, you'll transfer it into the escrow account. We use Secure Title, whose escrow account is at Citibank in New York, or they have a peso escrow account here if you have a Mexican seller who wants to have pesos. Any questions about that part? So we'll get to the real fun topic, which is that we have an all cash market here. And so what that means is that there are no banks offering mortgage loans using property here as collateral. There's no banks in Mexico who will offer that service for foreigners, and there's no banks in the US or Canada or anywhere else in the world who are doing that for like a standard 30-year mortgage or anything like that. So, and sellers are not offering that, because the reason for all of that is that under Mexican real estate law, once you transfer possession to a property, it's very difficult to get it back. So lenders are not going to take the risk that they loan you money, you move into the property, you pay for 1 year and you stop paying, and they can't get their asset back. They can't recover the asset. It's just very difficult to remove people from property here. And so lenders aren't willing to do it, and sellers are not willing to do it. It's too risky for them. So everything's all cash. You pay for the whole property before you take possession of the property. There are some banks that offer short-term, like bridge loans at a very high interest rate. And I'll post, I don't have the names of those banks right in front of me right now. I have never had a client use them because the interest rate's so high, and you know, other reasons. But I suppose if there was a situation where you needed to close, but you were going to be able to withdraw from your 401k in the next year or something, maybe you would do one of those short-term loans, or like a bridge loan to get you through to that time period. But I don't think they make those loans super attractive to people because of the interest rates and stuff. Most people are refinancing property in the US and getting cash, or Canada, or using, you know, retirement or savings for that. So it's funny because we talk about this a lot, and then it never fails. Like when we're looking for property, people were like, oh, I want to make an offer, but it's going to be, I'm going to lowball because it's all cash. I'm like, you can't do that because everyone's paying cash. It's not, you're not bringing in more to the table because you're paying cash, because everyone is. But you're not like hand carrying cash to Mexico. We're all doing it all via bank transfers, and we're making all the proper disclosures to the anti-money laundering, rulers of the universe. So all that is simple. I mean, it's just bank transfers. You're not carrying cash or something like that. And you don't have to have an account in Mexico. Okay, any questions on that part? The money bit?
In paying, yes, in paying for the property in cash, do you have to have a cashier's check, a personal check, or pesos?
No checks. You're gonna transfer money. You're gonna wire transfer money. Yeah, no one's gonna take a check here. So it's usually US dollars. That's most of our market is done in US dollars. If it's not, it's in pesos. And you'll either wire transfer dollars or pesos to the escrow account, or in some situations, you're sending it directly to a seller. Yeah? No other questions? Well, I
Kim, I
hope
just had a comment about that. I'm sorry, I just think I interrupted somebody.
No, go ahead.
Comment about the wire transfer, because I've heard a couple of people here say that when they were ready to buy a property here, that they had to have somebody in the United States, their legal representative, present at the bank branch to initiate the wire transfer. Or if it's like a couple, one of them stays here and one of them goes back to the States to handle the wire transfer of their bank in the US, or Canada, I imagine might be similar. And what we did, we went into our bank and talked to them and told them that we we're going to be buying a property outside of our home country. And we made arrangements for them so that we could initiate the wire transfer from here. Neither one of us had to be present in the bank branch in the United States, and they just do it with a PIN that you use. And with our bank, at least, we were able to stipulate to them the maximum that we wanted to be able to transfer in one day. So I think it's just worth mentioning that if you are going to be buying property after you're already down here, that you might want to have a conversation with your banker in your home country and try to make some arrangements ahead of time if you can to make the process easier.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a good thing to know. It is true. Many banks want someone physically in the bank to initiate a big wire transfer. In most of our situations, the people don't live here yet. And so they're going to transfer the money into escrow about a week before closing and then come down, so that the money is already sitting in escrow before they leave the country. But more and more, we have situations like you where people came here, maybe they're going to rent for 6 months or a year, and then they're going to buy, and they don't necessarily want to go back to do the bank stuff. So yeah, that's good advice to talk to them before you come and figure out how that's going to work, or if it's going to work. Thank you. Okay. Check my notes. The other thing to know, in addition to the fact that it's all cash, is that the buyer pays the closing costs here. And I'm not sure why that is. It's just a cultural thing, but you know, in Mexico, like when you rent a property, the buyer pays for the contract. When you buy a property, the buyer pays for all their closing costs. The seller will pay for their own capital gains taxes and any documentation, you know, if they have to provide documentation, their certificates of no liens and all those kind of things, they do pay for that. But the buyer is going to pay for the legal process to transfer title to them. And that can be expensive. It's, the closing costs here range from about 6% to over like 12 and 13%, depending on the purchase price of the property. The higher the purchase price, the lower the percentage is closing costs. So at like the 800,000 and up, the closing costs are around 5 to 6%. At 100,000 and below, they're closer to 10, 11, 12%. And that's just because some of those are just flat fees. the cost to set up a fideicomiso is the same whether you're buying a $4 million house or a $50,000 lot. The annual fee is the same. Some of the registration fees are the same. The notario price is going to change based on the price of the property, and the purchase acquisition taxes, which are 3.3%. That's the biggest chunk of closing costs that you pay. Those obviously are pegged to the purchase price. So that is something to keep in mind when you're looking for property. You need to, set your price range, understanding that you're going to have some additional closing costs. Anyone have questions about that?
I do have a question about taxes
Okay.
on the property. Will taxes be charged each year, A? And B, are those taxes going to be calculated arbitrarily or on a formula that is set up by the government?
Well, there are annual property taxes here. It's called predial, and they're very low. The valuation of your property changes upon sale. They don't go out every year and revalue your property for tax purposes. And to ballpark how much your taxes will be, you take 0.0028 times the registered purchase price. So let me just give you an example.
2.8%.
No, 0.0028. So on a $300,000 property, your taxes are around $840 per year, ballpark. You're going to pay that in pesos. And if you pay in December for the year in advance, you get 15% off of that.
The next question I would have is, we heard that a lot of properties are not completed in their construction so that the taxes would not be as high. Is that correct?
Well, yes, that's a cultural thing where Mexicans don't finish their property because they don't want to register and get terminación de obra and pay for the structure. Will of course backfire, because when you sell it, they're going to come out and look at it and see that it's completed and then try to charge some back taxes. So before you buy property, we make sure that all the construction is registered, so the taxes are correct. And they try to stop you from doing that, because as long as it shows as an empty lot on the tax rolls, they charge you a higher tax rate typically. So they want to encourage you to build and to register your construction. But as for the arbitrary calculation, I think that's entirely possible. I mean, when Puerto Morelos became its own municipality, like I guess it's 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago now, the government did go out and randomly just raise the tax rates on some. They kind of cherry picked some properties and raised the tax value. But really it's so low. I mean, it's hard to really complain about taxes here. Just you're not paying much. Anyone else? Paul, you're looking very thoughtful. I am open for questions, you guys. That's about it for me right now. We've kind of gone through the purchase process and talked about the big overview items, but if you have more specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or we have Donna here, we have Keith here who've been through this. Julie's in the process. Mark and Carrie are very early in there. Paul's in the process. So, anyone? Ask me a question so I can have a drink of wine.
I guess I got a question from my last day. We was there pretty much most of the month of July, at least my wife was. But one thing we noticed is, like, especially when it does seem worse this month, is the bugs were just like crazy. Like, go out to dinner and, got an idea it was going to go like a little fan and hook it up to a battery powered fan to the table to keep the no-see-ums away and that. But what I don't see much of is, like, in Florida, they have screened lanais. and have a lot of screened porch areas that almost everybody in Florida has one. And here I don't see any of them. So I'm just wondering, does those little screens don't do anything against the super bugs here, or is there a reason why you don't see more of them, I guess? Or are the bugs only bad at a part time?
We have one. I mean, I think a lot of people do screened in porches. What I don't see here my sister's in Tampa and they have these giant structures, like even over their swimming pools that are all screened. And I don't know why they don't have those here. I'm thinking about getting one. But yeah, no, I think screened in porches and stuff do work. I think part of what happens, Paul, is that you adapt, and for one thing, they don't bother you as much after you've been here a while. And the other thing is that you just learn when to go outside and when to not go outside. So we're all kind of have become experts on our own tolerance level for mosquitoes and when we want to be out of the house. So yes, you can do screened in porches. I know quite a few people who have done them at their properties. And it works to keep them out. The mosquitoes are worse always after rain, and we're in the rainy season. They don't seem to, I don't know, have you guys that are here noticed any spraying? I haven't.
I've not seen any spraying going on.
Yeah.
Like,
Spraying by.
yeah, we didn't see any
We did a lot of
government
spraying.
spraying or anything like that, but it was after the rain, it was terrible. They were terrible.
I think Donna went off, but she's in Punta Vista and they spray like once a week there, but they hired it. It's like a private company in Punta Vista. So no, I haven't seen the official trucks in a long time. So I'm not sure what's happening with that. You know, if they start having cases of dengue or something, they'll start spraying and going door to door and asking you to, come check and see if you have any standing water anywhere. But it's kind of different every year, Paul. There's no real pattern. But yeah, it's, you kind of have to wear protective clothing and have deep woods off. That's all I recommend.
Kim, is dengue a huge problem there?
It's not a huge problem, but in the 10 years I've been here, there have been some years where they're talking about it more than others when they're seeing more cases. And then it becomes a public health issue. Then anytime they notify the public health department that there's been a case of dengue, then they start tracking it and they'll start going door to door and checking with you and see if you have any symptoms. And because they're trying to keep a handle on what they need to do, which I appreciate because nobody wants that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
There was some sort of tax in the last conversation we were having that was 3%, and I missed what that was at that closing.
That's the purchase acquisition tax for Puerto Morelos.
Okay.
And that gets paid through the notary?
I didn't hear that. Sorry.
What did you say? And that gets paid went through the closing cost?
Yeah,
during the closing cost.
The notario is responsible for collecting that and paying it on your behalf.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What else, guys?
Hi, Kim. How you doing?
Good. You don't
That's
sound
good, yeah.
like Lisa.
No, this is Martin. Oh, that's right. Her name's up there. Well, I just wanted to pop in and say thanks for this here meeting. It's great. Keith actually answered my question about having the money in place with the bank. That was the question that I had. Another thing, to answer your question at the beginning of the show, I believe we are at the coldest place.
Oh.
Yeah, we're living in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. I think it's 57. It's 57 today. 57.
That sounds like heaven to me.
Heaven. No. Well, I appreciate all the information, and I just thought I'd say thank you to you and your panel. It's been lots
You're
of information.
welcome.
Great.
Thank you for joining us. Hey, grab the buyer's guide. I put the link in the chat. That also has some good information for you.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
And,
Thanks a lot.
and we'll have a lot of fun. Hi, Natasha. Haven't seen you in a while. What else? Star, are you there? No. Okay.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. I sent you an email back, so I'll wait for your response.
Okay, thank you. What
Kim,
else?
there's a question in the chat from Mark about the benefits of using transfer or Wise for the escrow transfers.
Mhm.
We do, and we still do use Wise, or started when they were Transfer Wise, and now it's Wise. We used them when we bought our car. And I think I used them when we bought the house for the first wire transfer that went into the escrow for the closing attorney, the portion of the closing attorney's costs and the earnest money. But with our bank personally in the US, there was a limit on the amount that we could transfer out of our account using a company like TransferWise. And I want to say it's $15,000 US. So then for the larger transfer, when we bought the house, I had the PIN number that I talked about earlier, and we could not do that online. I'm sure it varies by bank, but we couldn't do that one online. And we actually had to call into the transfer center and to speak to somebody on the phone and give them our PIN, and then they were able to do the larger transfer like that. So in our experience, Wise is a really good option. I know there's some other companies out there that you can use, but Wise is the one that we do use for transfers. It's just, there's a limit as to the amount that you can do. But like I said, it would depend on what bank you use in your home country, I think.
So I have found that Wise, for me, gives me a better exchange rate than my bank in the US, which is Wells Fargo, and my bank in Mexico, which is CI Banco. So for me, when I need to transfer money from the US to Mexico, it's always better for me to do it through Wise. I send it from Wells Fargo to Wise, they switch it to pesos, and then they send the pesos to my bank account here. And the transaction fee is less. So that's where the benefit comes for me. But I'm not doing giant transfers, but I've had customers do them. I mean, I've had customers buy $300,000 property we just did a couple months ago, and they sent everything through Wise because it was in pesos. It was 6 million pesos, I think. So yeah, I think that people have had good luck with it.
Yeah,
If you have to
I
do
think
pesos.
I think what I just said was actually kind of confusing. I may have confused myself when I was talking. That happens sometimes. We used Wise for the larger transfer for the bulk of the money to pay for the property. It was just how we initiated the transfer with our bank in the US that was the one we had to call and actually speak to a person to give them our PIN, but it did still go through TransferWise.
Oh, okay. Cool. So Donna, you missed the discussion of mosquito issues. Because I think Punta Vistas, I was at your house and there was a mosquito truck, but we haven't seen them around town. So.
Well, they're horrible right now, so it's not a good thing. So bad mosquitoes, bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi went out. That's something else that you got to get used to.
Inconsistent Wi-Fi.
Yes.
So Donna, when you built your house, did you consider screening in your porch, or do you feel like you can use it most of the time and it's okay?
It's an hour a night and we can live with that. No, I would not want it screened in. I'm not that, the bugs don't bother me that bad. I've had guests that they bother really bad, but I'm so used to it now that no, I never thought of screening it in.
Yeah. I wonder, so I personally, and maybe other people here can speak to this, I have kind of, when I first moved to Mexico, I felt every bite and it made me miserable. I'd be up at night just scratching and they would get giant welts and da-da-da. And now they really don't bother me. I mean, sometimes they're annoying, but it goes away very quickly. So I don't know if I just got used to it or they're not as mean anymore. I don't know, but.
I feel the same. They don't bother me as much.
it's not fun if a bunch of them are after you, but, well, the other thing is they love my husband. So if I'm with him, they ignore me. Yeah. Sadly for
I
him.
have just the opposite. They eat me alive and they leave Bill alone.
Yeah. One of the things you got to get used to here. All right, guys, what else? Did I skip any giant, you guys tell me that we're listening and you've already bought properties. Donna, do you have any advice? You've now bought and sold and bought again?
The only thing I would say is someone was talking about renting and then some lease to rent and things like that, or lease to own. I would say the renting part is good because you're here for more than a quick weekend or 2 weeks, but to do a long-term rent while you're looking is amazing. And we did the same thing. We rented and bought. We never went back to the States when we bought to do the money thing. We worked strictly online, on phone, things like that. And we did not have a problem at all transferring it into the, what's that called? Where we transfer the money, the
Escrow.
transferring into the escrow, there was no problem at all. And when we sold the house here, because we were building, when we had the money from the sale sold, we transferred a large amount of that into our bank here in Mexico so that we would have the cash to build in our Mexican bank and still held some of it in our US bank to pay other things. But that's the way we did it and it worked out fine.
Okay,
Yeah, that's very helpful.
yeah. So any like advice for people thinking of going through the buying process?
Here's my advice, having gone through it a year ago, is, and this was a tough one for me, and Kim can tell you, self-manage your expectations about what the timeline's going to be. We sold our house in Metro Atlanta when we moved down here last July. We sold right before we moved. We actually closed on July 30th and we flew down here on July 31st. And from the day we listed our house to the day we closed on it in Atlanta was 16 days. That's how hot the market was. And we accepted a cash offer. So we were able to do a 2-week closing basically. And then when you get here, we didn't know. And, you know, I thought, and what Kim said earlier, you know, we're paying cash. So, you know, we felt like that would make the process go faster, but everybody pays cash here. So it doesn't affect, you know, the time on your closing. And we were just expecting the closing to happen more quickly than it actually did. The house that we rented when we came down here, we got a 3-month lease and we thought that would be all that we would need. But between closing on the house and then actually buying a house that needed renovations and going through the renovation process, we were in the rental house for almost a year. So things don't move as quick here as they do in the US, and I'm assuming as they do in Canada. And that was a hard adjustment for me to make. And I think I've gotten a lot better in the last year about, you know, just being chill and going with the flow. But when I first got here, it was an adjustment for me. So just, you know, be aware that it's a different country and different processes and different customs, and things don't move as quickly here as they probably do back home for you.
Can I say something on that rental? If you're thinking about rental, if you are a good renter, you pay every month on time and aren't a pain in their butt or anything like that. They, especially when we were building, because it was so up in the air when we would be in our property, they were so good about extending it to the time we needed. So it's not like, okay, I rented it for 6 months, but it's going to take 7 months. They're going to kick me out. Where am I going to live for a month? If you talk to your people you're renting from, they're usually down here. If you're a good renter that pays on time, they're going to work with you.
That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, Donna, we had I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt you. We had the exact same situation with our landlord. He was great. And like I said, we went from 3 months and then we just added a month and added a month. And he was so awesome. I think by the end, he was getting in touch with me and saying, hey, Keith, do you need the house for another month or not? So he was really good and very flexible.
That's nice.
Yes, and there's so much here available for rent, whether you're looking in the Colonia or in the gated communities. There's not a lot for rent in long-term wise on the port side, just because they make so much money when they're renting those for vacation. But any place else, all of your outlying gated communities and all of the colonial, there is massive amounts of rentals. So you can come in and you can say, well, I've got a dog, I want to be in this price point, or I want to be close to this or that. There's a website too that does rentals that people that are renting in Puerto Morelos do. But actually living here for a while we were looking for the house really helped us decide exactly what we wanted.
Yeah, we have some good options. Come hell or high water, we're going to be there on November 1st. We're not going back. So we think we got it sorted out, but those comments about the lease to own were very, very helpful. And I think we'll bake into our decision, which we're making this week, really.
Exciting.
It's exciting.
Somebody just asked what the website was. Go to Facebook and look up Puerto Morelos rentals and it'll send you right to it.
I think there's a few. There's Puerto Morelos rental homes and Puerto Morelos for rent. And if you just put Puerto Morelos and rent, you'll see all the different groups.
Yes.
Yeah, there's quite a few options there. What else?
I've got a question. It has nothing to do with real estate. Paul, I'm super curious, your camera, I've never seen a camera that blurred out the background of the room you were sitting in like that. It must be a really fancy camera. It's kind of cool.
Actually, it's a Wise camera that I use for home security, and you can flush it so it'll go ahead and work as a webcam. It's $20. So, but actually it's through the Zoom. I think one time I was here, I had a fabulous California beach home in the background.
Yeah.
And then somebody said, wow, Paul, that's some nice digs. I'm like, yeah, it's nice, you know. But yeah, it's just when you go into, if you open up the Zoom, instead of just using the link she says and log into your Zoom account, there's a thing that'll blur your background, or you can set up one of the if you ever watch that show Parks and Rec that was on ABC with them, they have her desk and her office is one of the backgrounds. So it looks like you're sitting at, her desk or whatever in the mayor's office. So it's, yeah, they got it. You could really go down a rabbit hole there with the backgrounds.
It looks kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, well, mostly because I'm, this is the room that I got to keep clean. So figure just blur it out, just who knows. Plus, I don't want my cat or whatever might walk around back behind here. So we'll just keep it clean.
That's funny.
Hey, Kim. Kim.
Yes.
Stop the noise from Spider Cafe. You would be the closest one to know that answer.
I haven't heard it. We don't hear it.
Well, there's not a lot of late night happening going on right now anyways.
When we were there last week, we ate at El Campanario, which is basically across the street from there, and the sax player gave up. Like, he couldn't compete with what was coming out of Spider, and he said, I'm just gonna pack up my saxophone and go home.
That's so sad.
But then,
Yeah.
but then other nights we were there.
Yeah, other
and
nights it wasn't
bad.
bad. So I think when they're having a
That
special
one night.
event.
Was Temecula, California.
What else, guys? Well, I'm through my program, so if we don't have any more questions about buying. Oh, I will take your feedback on this. Oh, wait, there's something in the chat. What, have I missed something there? Oh, okay, that was how loud is Spider. What nights are good for you guys? We're thinking of moving off of Monday night. During the COVID shutdown, we did cocktails and conversations on Thursday nights, and people seem to really like that. You're almost to Friday. So we're kind of thinking about switching to Thursday from Monday, but I'd love your feedback on that. In terms of what night's a good night to hop on these.
Joanne will be
Thurs-
on, but I won't.
Well, then
Thursday
we're not
sounds
doing
great.
it.
Yeah, Thursday's an NFL night.
Oh, that's true. What time does
Not a
that start?
deal.
So's Monday, so.
Oh, right, yeah.
But I'll be here.
Somebody says Thursday. Yeah, Thursdays sound great. I think Thursday.
Thursdays would be good.
Yeah, I think Thursdays are good. Oh, so Patricia says Sunday through Tuesday. I mean, I'm also considering Wednesday. So Wednesday, Thursday is what we're kind of leaning towards. Wednesday's hump day. Thursday feels almost like Friday though. There's like a little
Yeah.
happiness on Thursday.
Close enough for the wine.
Right. And is 7 o'clock our time a good time for you all? Or I know everyone's spread out, so it's hard to pick a time that's universally, when we were all at home, we did it at 5 o'clock, which is great because nobody was going to work anyway. So we can't do that anymore. But any input on the time would be appreciated as well. Nobody?
So what time is it there now, Kim?
It is 8:19.
Okay, so when we lose our daylight savings time, you guys will be an hour ahead of us because you don't do that, right?
We will be, if you're in Oklahoma, no, yeah,
Right.
we'll be Eastern time.
Right, okay.
Mhm. Yeah, that's confusing too. Another thing to get used to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. And, as
Thank
always,
you.
send me your questions. We're available. If you want to talk privately, if you want to get some more information, that's great too. All right. Thanks so
So
much.
good.
guys.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Take
See you in
care.
41 days.